mean you're not on the same page?
They're not even in the same book.
Still believe Democrats can win in November.
I believe Democrats will win up and down the ballot. Joe Biden will be reelected, and we're going to take the House.
An attack on one is an attack on all. The strongest possible deterrent to aggression, the best way to prevent war from happening in the first place, is exactly that commitment.
Hello, I'm Robert Costa in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. President Biden is addressing world leaders in Washington. His remarks come at a high-stakes NATO summit, and it's getting underway right now. The meeting is expected to largely focus on Russia, the war in Ukraine, and Western countries' responses to that. The president working now on two fronts as he tries to unite the alliance and his party behind his own re-election bid. Sam Vinograd and Ed O'Keefe join us now. Sam is a CBS News national security contributor. Ed is CBS News' senior White House correspondent. Ed, we'll begin with you. You're outside the White House. What's the president's message at NATO as he faces all of this political discussion at home?
Yeah, the world stage coming to Washington and to the president's front yard, Bob. The president expected tonight to herald the fact that this alliance, which was established by the signing of some paperwork in the exact room where he'll speak 75 years ago, remains the strongest military alliance in the world and one that has expanded despite the Ukraine conflict, something that the president continues to talk about quite frequently as he makes the case to voters that he should be reelected, that he expanded and fortified what is seen as the most important military alliance in the world. This will be the first meeting at which Finland and Sweden are full members, but much of the conversation around this summit will be that big white country there on the map that isn't quite filled in gray or blue, and that is Ukraine, of course, which remains at war with Russia nearby. We're expecting a series of announcements in the coming hours regarding a series of measures to boost Ukraine's capabilities as the war continues. And you're going to see over the course of the next few days the president meeting with President Zelensky of Ukraine, the new British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. There's going to be appearances by several Indo-Pacific and some Asian countries that are now working in partnership with NATO in various ways, all of it designed to show the world and to show skeptical Americans, most of all, that the president is someone who still has the power to convene at least the Western world or democratic countries together to fight aggression from Russia, from China, and other threats.
Ed, thank you for that illuminating look at everything the president is facing. World leaders, though, are also looking at Vladimir Putin, Sam, and they see he is making his own alliances. India, Hungarian's Prime Minister Viktor Orban, a recent meeting in Moscow. What's your assessment of how the Russians are handling this moment for NATO?
Well, while President Biden has been focused on building out the NATO alliance, 2 additional countries have joined during his presidency. We now have 23 member states reaching their commitment to spend 2% of GDP on national defense. That is viewed as a success for the Biden administration. While the U.S. has been bolstering our alliances, Putin has not been sitting on the sidelines. He has been equally as focused on establishing himself as not a pariah on the international stage, but as a country with friends. And that is why we saw Putin invite Prime Minister Modi of India to Russia. India and the Soviet Union were quite close during the Cold War. India is now the second largest buyer of Russian oil, despite U.S. sanctions. And that visit was ill-timed. It is occurring on the margins of the NATO summit. At the same time, Hungary, a NATO member since 1999, is notably close with Vladimir Putin. So Vladimir Putin is bolstering his own relationships, his own alliances, while Biden is trying to show a stronger and more united NATO.
Ed, are you still with us?
Yep.
Ed, what's the latest on the questions facing the White House and President Biden about his health?
Well, it was notable. The press secretary today said the White House is eager to turn the page and continue doing the job. But up the street outside the Capitol was Democrats coming out of a big meeting they had together, House Democrats, where one, Steve Cohen of Tennessee, suggested we're not even on the same page. We're not even in the same book in regards to how exactly House Democrats believe the president and the party should proceed going into November. We've now seen another vulnerable House Democrat tonight, Mickey Sherrill of northern New Jersey, somebody who's seen to have statewide ambitions in the Garden State in the future, come out and suggest that she wants the president to step aside as well. She says, the president cares deeply about the future of the country, but she's asking him to declare that he won't run for re-election for reasons similar to the reasons raised by other so-called frontliners or the most vulnerable of House Democrats in districts and in states where things are going to get awfully purple this fall. But here at the White House, they yet again today faced questions about it, saying the president continues to talk to lawmakers. He's having a meeting tonight virtually with big city Democratic mayors, including the leaders of New York and Chicago, to continue the outreach he did to governors last week and others in recent days. And as for questions about his health, overnight they issued this letter clarifying that this military and medical expert on neurology had been here 8 times in the last year, not to see the president, not in regards to his health, but as part of regular meetings with the White House physician and other medical professionals who work here on the White House campus, where thousands of members of the military and civilians, of course, are also treated. So that clarification was given. And they continue to have to weather the concerns raised by Democrats across the country. The president will be most concerned about those like Congresswoman Cheryl from New Jersey raising concerns, and yet understands why they might have to put some public distance between them and him. But if that continues to trickle out, and if things don't go well with this summit in the coming days, they anticipate the calls will intensify, even though he continues to say, and your reporting, my reporting, everybody else's reporting here at CBS bears this out, that he's got no plans to get out.
Sam, what do world leaders make of all this? I sat down with the Secretary General of NATO on Sunday when he was on Face the Nation, and he kind of dodged the question a little bit. He said he's focused on NATO, focused on the summit. Is there private concern just about President Biden's standing among some world leaders or not? I mean, or maybe the question, too, is, since you're so well-sourced and have great connections in the national security community, are national security experts concerned that all of this political talk could have an impact on his ability to have capital and stature at the NATO summit?
Well, certainly my sources do indicate that globally we are seeing scenario planning by our allies and our adversaries alike under 2 scenarios. One, President Biden continuing and being viewed in a diminished capacity, whether rightfully or wrongfully, on the world stage, what that means for U.S. leadership globally, or President Trump being elected and really retrenching from our historical system of alliances that was built after World War II. So there is certainly scenario planning underway by our allies and adversaries, which is just prudent. But, Bob, I've been to NATO summits. I've staffed several of them. And it's worth noting that there's an official agenda for these summits, and then there's an unofficial agenda.
What's the unofficial one for this one?
The unofficial agenda for the both the sitting U.S. president and for his re-election campaign is reassurance on 2 fronts. Reassuring our allies that the U.S. is committed to not just the NATO alliance as it stands, but building the NATO alliance going forward, including by welcoming Ukraine into that alliance. And the reassurance agenda is equally as focused on reassuring our allies and the world that is watching that the president is up to the task. So it is that dual reassurance agenda, while unofficial, that is top of mind for the president and his team.
Sam Vinograd and Ed O'Keefe, thank you so much for your reporting. We appreciate it. Meanwhile, former Oklahoma Republican Senator Jim Inhofe has died. Inhofe's family says the Republican had a stroke over July 4th in that holiday and passed away Tuesday morning. Inhofe served in the Senate from 1994 until 2023. Covered him for many years myself. And for several years, he was the chair of the Armed Services Committee. He gained a lot of attention for doubting that climate change was caused in any way by human activity, calling the theory, quote, the greatest hoax ever perpetuated on the American people. Senator Inhofe was a conservative, well-liked by his colleagues, 89 years old. We will have more news ahead. You're streaming America Decides. President Biden spoke earlier today in Washington to mark 75 years of NATO. Leaders of the alliance are gathering there for a key summit.
Today, NATO is more powerful than ever. 32 nations strong. For years, Finland and Sweden were among our closest partners. Now they have chosen to officially join NATO, and because of the power and meaning of Article 5 guarantee, that's the reason. It was the most important aspect of the alliance in 1949, and it is still the most important aspect. I'd also note Finland and Sweden joined the alliance not just because their leaders sought it, because their citizens called for it in overwhelming numbers. Remember, NATO's character is fundamentally democratic, always has been and always must continue to be. And today, NATO is better resourced than it ever has been. I want to pause on this because it's significant. In the year 2020, the year I was elected president, only 9 NATO allies were spending 2% of their defense GDP on defense. This year, 23 will spend at least 2%. And some will spend more than that. And the remaining countries that have not yet reached that milestone will get there soon. This remarkable progress, proof that our commitment is broad and deep, that we're ready, that we're willing, we're able to deter aggression and defend every inch of NATO territory across every domain: land, air, sea, cyber, and space. My friends, it's good that we're stronger than ever, because this moment in history calls for our collective strength. Autocrats want to overturn global order, which is by and large kept for nearly 80 years and counting. Terrorist groups continue to plot evil schemes to cause mayhem and chaos and suffering. In Europe, Putin's war of aggression against Ukraine continues, and Putin wants nothing less than Ukraine's total subjugation, to end Ukraine's democracy, to destroy Ukraine's culture, and to wipe Ukraine off the map. And we know Putin won't stop at Ukraine. But make no mistake, Ukraine can and will stop Putin. Especially with our full collective support. They have our full support. Even before Russian bombs were falling in Ukraine, the alliance acted. I ordered the U.S. reinforcements at NATO's eastern flank. More troops, more aircraft, more capabilities. And now the United States has more than 100,000 troops on the continent of Europe. NATO moved swiftly as well, not only reinforcing the 4 existing battle groups in the east, but also adding 4 more in Bulgaria, Hungary, Romania, and Slovakia, essentially doubling NATO's strength on the eastern flank. Together, we've built a global coalition to stand with Ukraine. Together, we provided significant economic and humanitarian assistance. And together, we've supplied Ukraine with weapons it needs to defend itself: tanks, armored fighting vehicles, air defense systems, long-range missiles, and millions of munitions. The United States and nearly 24 allied partners have signed bilateral security agreements with Ukraine, and more countries will follow. Today, I'm announcing an historic donation of air defense equipment for Ukraine. The United States, Germany, the Netherlands, Romania, and Italy will provide Ukraine with the equipment for 5 additional strategic air defense systems. And in the coming months, the United States and our partners intend to provide Ukraine with dozens of additional tactical air defense systems.
House and Senate Democrats are holding closed-door meetings this week, a lot of them in Washington, to address how President Biden should proceed on his re-election bid. Our Scott McFarland is on Capitol Hill. He'll join us next with more on where things stand. You're streaming America Decides. What a scene on Capitol Hill in the past few days. House Democratic leaders say they are having, quote, constructive discussions. You hear that phrase a lot, about President Biden and his candidacy, where things stand. But some members of Congress, or the Democrats, are not fully committing to backing him at this point. In response to whether House Democrats came to a consensus today, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries said, quote, conversations are ongoing. While House Democratic Caucus Chair Pete Aguilar said they support President Biden as long as he is the presumptive nominee, he underscored that their focus is on winning in November.
Our caucus meeting today was about listening to members. There was no instruction to get on the same page. We were talking about the importance, the twin goals that we have, preventing Donald Trump from ever setting foot in the White House and getting 218 votes for Hakeem Jeffries on January 3rd.
Scott McFarland joins us now from Capitol Hill. It's been a busy day, Scott, for you. A lot of lawmakers to chase, to ask questions to. Let's listen, though, to New York Democrat Jerry Nadler, what he had to say.
On the call Sunday, did you call on him to step aside? What changed for you?
I'm not going to comment on what I said in a private meeting. All I'll say is the president made very clear yesterday that he's running, and for me that's dispositive. We have to support him.
Do you have concerns about him being on the top of the ticket?
Whether I have concerns or not, is beside the point. He's going to be our nominee, and we all have to support him.
Scott, let me read that back to you again. Quote, whether I have concerns or not is beside the point. He's going to be our nominee. We all have to support him. Is the Nadler POV, that point of view, the point of view of most Democrats right now? Or is there some faction that has much more enthusiasm for President Biden and another faction that maybe is even more negative publicly and privately? How do you read it all?
Well, I think the largest faction, Bob, is the undeclared group that hasn't announced or answered questions about where they stand on whether the president should withdraw. I can tell you this for sure. Over the past 24 hours, the president has largely treaded water with political support among elected Democrats in Congress. He got one back in Jerry Nadler, who at one point said the president should withdraw, then today mustered some support, but late this afternoon he lost one. Mikey Sherrill, the Democrat from New Jersey, who flipped a red seat from blue in those 2018 midterms, issued a lengthy statement championing President Biden's accomplishments, but concluding the statement by saying he should step aside from this race to help preserve the White House and prevent a Trump presidency again. Listen, look at that quote there, Bob. I know President Biden cares deeply about the future of our country. That's why I'm asking that he declare that he won't run for re-election. In the Senate, Bob, pretty much everybody who's not a top vocal Biden surrogate kept their powder dry again today. Didn't join those 7 to 9 House Democrats who specifically said the president should withdraw. But we questioned 2 senators in particular who had some compelling things to say. One of his best surrogates, Chris Coons of Delaware, and one of the most powerful Senate Democrats of all, Dick Durbin of Illinois. Listen to the contrasts in their responses.
At this point, I would say to the president, the challenge is to you. Show us in the way you campaign that you can effectively beat Donald Trump. Show us that you're a good candidate, and I believe he is, and that what we saw in that debate night is not typical of what we're going to see in the future.
Many of my colleagues have concern. But what the president has done is listened to those concerns, acted on them, and sent all of us a letter. He's in, he's running, he will be our nominee, he will be our next president.
So let me give you the basic summary here, Bob. The House is disjointed, not speaking with one voice, and really all over the place on this issue. The Senate has preserved its ability largely to try to synchronize, to try to unify. If they're going to push one direction or the other, most of them have kept a bit of equivocation in their words and in their voices and can still try to muster a unified effort.
But, Scott, great reporting, but I'm not hearing anybody who's really willing to push President Biden off. Sending a gentle letter is one thing, as the Congresswoman from New Jersey did, but that's not a political war against the incumbent. Is anybody preparing to actually, one, run against President Biden, as he's called any challenger to do? He said, take me on at the convention. Or 2, just come out and say, it's over. He has to step aside. Or is it, do you sense in your reporting a little bit of a receding in that sentiment?
See, I don't think it's that. I don't think there's been ground gained by the president over the past 24 hours. What I'm sensing in the Senate in particular is people are deferring this or hitting a snooze button on what to say about the president. Should he withdraw? They're giving him, and to a degree themselves, more time, more opportunities for the president to speak, and as so many of them have said, show himself, prove himself, demonstrate something to the voters, demonstrate something to elected officials that really does point everybody in the direction of Thursday, doesn't it, Bob, when he has that press conference?
Over the weekend, headline after headline, Senator Mark Warner of Virginia is preparing to huddle with colleagues to discuss the future of the Democratic ticket. We kept hearing about Senator Warner. It was all over every single political publication, political news show. Then suddenly Senator Warner decides to not have this meeting. Where is he today on the Biden question? And who, if anyone, among Senate Democrats is the kind of point person for the Biden concerned coalition?
It's another broad group, I think, in the U.S. Senate. Most Senate Democrats, Bob, have given us a relatively uniform response of we have concerns, we have questions, we need more time. They walked out of their Tuesday Senate Democrat luncheon with what appeared to be a company line of it was a constructive meeting, we have nothing to declare, nothing to announce. It seems clear that they have tried to buy themselves and buy the president a little more time before declaratively saying anything one way or the other, with the small exception, Bob, of those top surrogates who've been championing the Biden presidency and campaign from the jump. Chris Coons, from whom you just heard, John Fetterman of Pennsylvania, and a small handful of others.
Scott McFarland, thank you. We appreciate your reporting. It was interesting over the weekend. Senator Bernie Sanders said he's not going to go to that Warner meeting. Too conservative, he said of Senator Warner's. Always tensions in politics. Meanwhile, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus is throwing its weight behind President Biden. The caucus chair will join us here on America Decides. Stick with us. As you know, some House Democrats are calling on President Biden to drop his re-election bid, but many are deciding to stand behind him despite what happened at the debate. That includes members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. The caucus chair and deputy chair released a statement last night saying, quote, "We stand with President Biden, and we look forward to our continued partnership on the road and legislative wins to benefit the American people." CBS News polling shows President Biden currently leads former President Donald Trump by just 2 points among Latino voters. In 2020, his support among those voters was more than double that of Trump's. The chair of this caucus joins us now from Capitol Hill, Democratic Congresswoman Nanette Barragán. Thank you so much for being here. Take us inside the deliberations, Congresswoman, about this decision by your caucus to stand with President Biden.
Well, this was a statement put out by me on behalf of myself as chair and the deputy chair, rather, SBI. And it was a statement of the two of us, of our standing with the president and the vice president. There's been a long partnership with the Biden-Harris administration for the last year and a half to take the Congressional Hispanic Caucus on the road. So this has been an extension of that and making sure that we stated our support of the president and the vice president, continuing to do the work of not just going out and engaging folks where Latino communities are, but it's also to highlight legislative wins that House Democrats have worked very closely with the Biden-Harris administration to achieve. One of those things, of course, is to also talk about things like the executive order the president just did to protect the spouses of U.S. citizens. Last week, also, we were with the First Lady in Allentown, Pennsylvania. We have over 50% Latino population to talk about education and workforce. So this is what it's about. It's about going out. It's engaging people. It's about talking about the issues and making sure people know what this president and this vice president have done and how we have worked to put people over politics.
Do you personally have any concerns about President Biden's health or his ability to beat former President Trump?
I would not support the president if I didn't think he could win. This is the one person who's beat Donald Trump. This is somebody who has a record of passing historic legislation that has a positive impact on the Latino community, whether it was expanding access to health care for veterans in the PACT Act, whether it was infrastructure that was creating lots of jobs, including in the Latino community in the construction field, whether it's STEM, which was we're going to put more money to make sure that there are students and students of color, including Latinos, in the pipeline for STEM to get those jobs. There are so many accomplishments, you almost don't know where to start, but it's about also moving forward. It's implementing those things and things like the IRA to combat climate change, but it's also what are we going to do moving forward for Latino communities. And we know we're going to continue to work with the president to try to get things like comprehensive immigration reform done, continue to expand access to health care coverage. Let's not forget what is at stake here.
Well, in terms
former
of
president.
Well, that's right. Let's dig into that. Former President Trump has called for sweeping mass deportations should he win the White House again. Do you believe the Latino community inside Congress, but also outside of Congress, is fully aware of Trump's policy position and proposal?
Well, that's exactly what I was about to say. In my district and throughout the country, when you talk to folks and you bring up Project 2025, sometimes you get a blank stare. They really don't know yet about what's in it. And so when you talk to people about not only what the president has done, but what is at stake, and that former President Trump wants to do mass deportations, and that innocent people are going to get swept up. The former president himself has said this, that is something that resonates with folks and saying, wait a minute, what? And there is great concern about another Trump presidency, which is why we've got to go out and we've got to make sure people understand what's at stake. It's not just that, it's women's reproductive rights. Just take a look at Nevada, where 81% of Latino voters there believe a woman should have the right to make decisions about their own body. These are decisions these are issues we have to go and talk about to continue that engagement. And I think when voters continue to hear about what has been done, what is at stake, and what they're going to continue to do in another 4 years, that we're going to be able to move this across the finish line, just like he did 4 years ago.
Congresswoman Barragan, we appreciate your time. It seems your caucus is standing by President Biden. It's been a week of a lot of consternation on Capitol Hill, but I'm sure the White House appreciates your position. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And President Biden heads into that NATO summit, focusing on Ukraine and other issues. And as he continues to do, focus on his own battle to keep the Democrats together. Our political panel coming up is right here, standing by, ready to take a close look at everything that's happening in American politics. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. The NATO summit has kicked off, where dozens of world leaders are now in Washington for that event. Here to discuss what's going on in American politics, not necessarily at NATO, Dave Weigel and Tom LoBianco. Dave is a politics reporter for Semaphore. Tom is the co-founder and national political reporter for 24-Site News. Great to have you both here. A lot of eyes tonight on Florida.
That's right. You've got one Trump rally, one of a couple coming up, in a place very near to where Marco Rubio and his family live. It is unclear when he's going to pick a running mate. He's been in the catbird seat for 11 days now, because longer than that. The focus has not been on Donald Trump. He will eventually get whatever news cycle he wants when he picks a running mate. But in the meantime, he's doing what Donald Trump does very well, and stringing people along and driving attention and eyeballs to. I think I've covered umpteen Trump rallies where there was going to be news at it, and we had to wait 3 hours for it to happen. So that's my only prediction tonight, is that we're going to get some of that.
Is Rubio still in the mix, Tom?
Yeah. Okay, right. Rubio, J.D. Vance, Doug Burgum, as we were just talking about, North Dakota governor. It seems to be those three. Now, it's Trump who we're talking about. There could be a wild card out there. Probably not Kristi Noem. Probably not Tim Scott either. But what's so fascinating about this, as opposed to 8 years ago, the last time he picked a running mate, is the steadiness of this process, the methodicalness of all of it. I mean, last time was pure chaos.
And I mean, last time I remember covering it with you guys, and Trump was thinking about Governor Chris Christie, the former governor at the time of New Jersey. He was thinking about Newt Gingrich, and then ultimately Mike Pence. You wrote the book, literally, Tom.
Yeah.
Piety and Power, on Mike Pence. Is Trump looking for another Pence?
No.
Not maybe Pence specifically, but someone in that mold.
Well, when he picked Pence in 2016, it was a different electoral dynamic. He needed to bring back Midwest evangelicals, a lot of reticent conservatives, a lot of Ted Cruz supporters back then. I'm not sure that is the same case here. He's not in as precarious, at this moment, he's not in as precarious an electoral
But he does
problem.
need traditional Republicans to come along. So why isn't Nikki Haley on the list?
I don't think she's that interested in it.
They're all interested in it, Dave.
Would they turn down the chance to be a one-term lame duck president's running mate? Probably not. But she has not made the moves that you would need to do to pander to Donald Trump successfully since she dropped out of the race. She released her delegate. She's not attending the convention. It's also, it hasn't been clear that she brings that many people along. She was a protest vote for a lot of people throughout the primary and after the primary. But the idea that she was going to appeal to a demographic that didn't like Trump as a Trump running mate, that didn't show up in polling.
So if you're in the Trump campaign and you're trying to reach the Nikki Haley voter but not put Nikki Haley on the ticket, who do you pick? Is it Doug Burgum, who is kind of North Dakota traditional conservative business guy? Is it Senator Tim Scott, who has that echo of Reagan's rhetoric and a lot of his own ideology?
Well, what is very different from 2016 is that Burgum, I guess more than the other candidates we're talking about, brings you stability, and Donald Trump right now, please feel free to be angry at me online if I'm saying this, is the candidate of stability. It is very clear that what Donald Trump is running on.
I think you mean in terms of political
In terms of political stability.
He has control of the party.
He has control of the party.
His true socialist,
he has a record.
Shall we say it's scattered.
Yes, he has a record that he run on. Is he on message every day?
And he's talking about military tribunals of Liz Cheney.
But there was uncertainty about how he would govern in 2016. In 2020, he was running after a very chaotic handling of COVID. I'm kind of underselling it. And this time, he is running against a party that is unsettled. You have 7 Democrats today saying they want Biden off the ticket. Whoever his running mate is would be, if this is the Biden-Harris ticket again, would be in a debate possibly with Kamala Harris after a month of being undermined by her own party and people going on the record saying we wish we could run somebody else for president, not her. So he just has, this is the best situation he's ever had to pick a running mate in and the best narrative he's ever had.
You know, I mean, the thing that I always hear from Trump sources for years now, I mean, this is one of the longest vice presidential selection processes that we've ever witnessed, at least in modern times, is that it's so emotional with Trump. You know, rightly or wrongly, it's a single vote that matters here. It's Trump. And, you know, his people always say that he felt stung by Pence on January 6th. And that reason is why you used to hear a lot about people like Ben Carson, somebody supremely diminutive in this process, incredibly non-threatening. I think that's also why Burgum is still around. I mean, you look at, you know, as Dave was saying here, you know, you look at these tryouts, the stagecraft, Doral, Rubio, or you bring out Melania. But behind the scenes, Burgum has been showing up with his wife at Mar-a-Lago, doing that personal work.
Trump likes him. I hear Trump likes him. There's something about Burgum being a business person, someone who had a software company, sold to Microsoft. Let's turn to the Democrats, though. While we still have you two top guys here. Every single hour, there's another story about another House Democrat who most Americans may not even know. I just keep thinking about President Biden. We covered his campaign in 2020. We covered it probably back in 2008 to a point. He is someone who runs for the Senate in 72. He's up and down. He runs in 1988, 87. He really struggles with the scandal over plagiarism, comes back. Judiciary Committee, Foreign Relations Committee. This guy doesn't quit American politics. And he has always had a chip on his shoulder about how the press has treated him, how they've perceived him. It's not LBJ in the Kennedy level. I mean, the Kennedy people famously scorned LBJ. There's always a sense among Biden sources that the Obama coalition inside the White House didn't appreciate Biden's political skills. So where does this really stand? Is this president at 81 years old digging in and here to stay? Or do you really believe there's enough political capital in the party, if someone ever wanted to use it, to push him out?
There's not political capital outside of the Biden family, the Biden inner circle. That's been cleared the last few days. And speaking of the past, what the Obama administration, how they handled him, how Obama handled him, he remembers 9 years ago being talked out of running for president. Now, he was trailing in the polls if he'd run against Hillary Clinton. The argument was that he couldn't beat her in the primary. But he remembers not just not running for president, but everyone after the fact saying, gosh, Joe, we wish we'd run you against Donald Trump. We would have won the election. And it's hard to unlearn that. And other Democrats pointing out that no man steps in the same river twice. He is not the Joe Biden who beat Donald Trump in 2020. It has not penetrated because he is Joe Biden. He knows what he was like. And he has processed, I take from it his word, he's processed that he had a bad night, not a night typical or a performance typical what he can do. It hasn't mattered that in the Dayson's debate, he hasn't shown Democrats the sort of live action Joe Biden that convinced them he was credible in 2020.
He went on the trail in North Carolina.
Yeah.
Philadelphia.
He could read off a speech of a teleprompter, but we heard Democrats saying after the debate, we'd like to see him mix it up with voters. We'd like to see him take questions, do an interview.
The Stephanopoulos interview hasn't reassured.
It's reassured Democrats, but it's not what they asked for. They asked for something a lot more heated to prove that he could show up and be credible against Donald Trump for 90 minutes, and he hasn't done that. But a lot of them have realized this is the Joe Biden who has been told to quit, didn't, and won, and it is hard to unlearn that.
And I just wonder, who is the Democrat, if any, who, if they ever stood up and said, enough, Joe, it's over, could get this president to step away? Congresswoman Cheryl has her allies in Congress, but I don't think the White House is worried tonight about her statement with respect to her. But even if Congressman Clyburn, I've wondered about Clyburn. Yeah. If Clyburn came out, he said today he's with President Biden 100%. We're riding with Biden, he said. But even if Clyburn spoke out, does the president really move away and say that's it? I don't know.
I mean, the way he handled it, and it's so baked into him. I keep on thinking about the seminal tome in campaign politics. What's the central thesis of what it takes? Richard Ben Kramer is don't stop, keep running.
And that book details Biden had an aneurysm.
Yes.
In the 88 campaign.
Yes.
And he's battled health things his entire last 30, 40 years.
And I think about the young Biden that jumped into the ash heap in Scranton on a dare. You really saw in so much of this in the Stephanopoulos interview. Stephanopoulos did such a great job pressing him repeatedly and calmly, which is what we do. Very good job. And not getting the answer. And Biden, you start to see more of this defiance coming out, that broadside. At the start of the week, Congress comes back and he says, I'm not leaving, not leaving. And all of that points to it's him. I'm not sure that anybody pushes him out at this point.
We will have more news ahead. You're streaming America Decides. And as we've been discussing all show, Democrats are at a crossroads. Some of them want President Biden to, of course, stay on the ticket with Vice President Harris. Others are trying to nudge the ticket to be reconsidered as the Democratic convention in Chicago in August approaches. But Vice President Harris, she's out there on the campaign trail today in Las Vegas, Nevada. She's talking about what's at stake, abortion rights, American democracy, in her view. Let's bring in our correspondent and our reporter on this beat, Nydia Cavazos, who is following Vice President Harris. You spoke to voters in Nevada. What are you hearing, Nydia?
Bob, I've been speaking to voters here in Vegas, in Nevada being a battleground state, and what we come across is that voters are often still undecided. They're making up their mind. They still don't know if it's going to be Biden. They don't know if it's going to be Trump who they're supporting. But what they often cite is, of course, Biden's age is a concern. But we also hear from different voters saying that, while Biden's age might be a concern, it's not as big of a concern as Trump agenda is to many of these voters. But of course, as much of the attention has been on Vice President Kamala Harris and the speculation as to whether she can potentially be a replacement on the nomination ticket for the Democratic Party, I asked voters, what do you think about Vice President Kamala Harris? Do you support her, or would you support Trump? And this is what they had to say.
I think that she needs to be replaced as well. I don't think she should run again either. We need new candidates ASAP.
She's holding the position that she is in with the thought in mind that perhaps she may have to step up, and I think she's ready for whatever comes up. She had plenty of time to prepare herself for that position at the top or in the second seat.
I don't really know a whole lot about her. She's been pretty kind of in the shadows, so to speak, since Biden took office, so I don't know a whole lot about her or what she would bring to the office in terms of leadership quality. But I would certainly consider her, absolutely.
And this is what voters have to say here in Nevada on Vice President Kamala Harris. And for many, they're still willing to support whoever the Democratic candidate is. They say anything is better than a Trump agenda.
And Nydia, you cover Vice President Harris day in, day out. You've spoken to her in recent weeks. You've observed her team up close. What are you seeing as you cover her and you cover her team? Are they on edge about all of this Democratic discussion about the ticket and whether the Biden-Harris campaign can win? Are they trying to project confidence? What's it like when you're inside the bubble?
What we know so far is that, in speaking to some of her team members and on her campaign side, what they express is that they're focused on moving forward on campaigning. Their goal is to establish the difference between a Trump administration and a Biden administration. They say that the vice president's role is also to support President Biden. And when I specifically asked Harris just last week, is she ready to lead the country? Her answer is President Biden is going to be the nominee. And this is what her team has been focused on saying. President Biden is the nominee, and as far as the vice president, she's going to be campaigning and helping the Biden and Harris ticket in November. And of course, this comes with mobilization efforts across different demographics and across different battleground states.
And are Democrats, Nydia, getting prepared for former President Donald Trump to make his vice presidential selection, and how that could play into Vice President Harris's own campaign this summer and fall?
I did get a chance to ask some of the voters across different campaign events for the vice president, and they often cite that they really think that she's going to be a strong vice president debater against whoever former President Donald Trump ends up selecting as his vice president or as his running mate. But what voters have to say is that they really are confident in her abilities, and of course, as we anticipate this announcement from former President Donald Trump, there's still much speculation. And it was notable that among many Latino voters who I spoke to here in Nevada just a couple of weeks ago, they say that to them it's going to be a concern if Marco Rubio ends up being Trump's running mate, because they think that this is going to help Trump's ticket. So this is something that I've been hearing across the campaign trail when it comes to Latino voters.
And finally, Nydia, what does Vice President Harris have planned for the rest of the week?
So today she's in Nevada. She's going to be courting specifically Asian American, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islander, this key demographic group here in Nevada. But then she's going to go on to Dallas and then North Carolina, and she's going to be focusing on courting black voters. And then she ends the week in Pennsylvania, yet another battleground state. And again, she's going to be focused on courting the AAPI community. But throughout the entire month of July, we're going to see a packed agenda for the vice president. But in talking to people that are close to her, they say this is not something for people to necessarily read into it. This is just her campaigning for Biden and Harris. And again, she's strongly supporting President Biden as the nominee to the Democratic Party.
A packed agenda for Vice President Harris, a packed agenda for you, Nydia, and so many other reporters covering the vice president and the campaign. We thank you for your time. And as we do from time to time at the end of our program, we look back today at an event that happened on this day in political history. 6 years ago today, then President Donald Trump nominated Brett Kavanaugh to succeed Justice Anthony Kennedy on the Supreme Court. Kavanaugh was at the time a federal appeals court judge and had previously served as an aide to President George W. Bush. Trump that day called him, quote, one of the sharpest legal minds in our time.
He is considered a judge's judge, a true thought leader among his peers.
My judicial philosophy is straightforward. A judge must be independent and must interpret the law, not make the law.
Almost 2 months later, Justice Kavanaugh, as you know, was sworn in after a contentious confirmation hearing that included accusations of sexual misconduct in the early 1980s. That does it for today. We will be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now.